Lo, educated fake dad. That was the nameplate sitting in front of me when I walked into my only son's wedding. 300 guests dressed in gowns and tuxedos, chandeliers glittering like falling stars, champagne glasses clinking in the background. Yet all I could hear was the echo of those cruel words. My chest burned hotter than the whiskey I hadn't even touched. I raised Daniel alone since he was 3 years old. I worked 2 jobs, my hands blistered, my back broken, so he could stand tall in this very moment. But when I looked down and saw those words engraved in gold letters, I felt smaller than a beggar at the gates of a palace. The insult didn't come from a stranger. It came from Raymond Clark, the bride's father, a world-famous surgeon. He and his polished family snickered as if mocking me was their appetizer before the feast. I was about to leave, crushed under the weight of humiliation, when Daniel grabbed my hand, looked his bride's family straight in the eyes, and said loudly, "Dad, let's go home. They just made the biggest mistake of their lives." My name is Henry Parker. I am 55 years old, with grey hair that no barber can ever fully tame, and a body carved by years of carrying bricks, hammering beams, and mixing cement. People say I still look strong, but I know the truth. Strength isn't in the muscles anymore. It's in the scars, the calluses, the memories of nights when my son was crying in the next room, and I had to choose between sleeping or taking another shift just to keep the lights on. 20 years ago, my wife walked out. She said she couldn't handle the burden of being married to a construction worker who came home smelling of sweat and concrete dust. Daniel was only 3 then. I still remember that night. She left with a suitcase, heels clicking on the wooden floor, and Daniel's tiny hands clutching my jeans, asking why Mommy didn't kiss him goodnight. I had no answer. That night, I swore I would never let my boy feel abandoned again. So I worked. During the day, I carried bricks under the hot New York sun, skin blistering until it peeled. At night, I unloaded crates in a warehouse, the smell of gasoline and rubber searing my nose. My hands cracked in winter until blood stained the boxes I lifted, but I never complained. Each paycheck, no matter how small, was stretched across rent, groceries, and Daniel's school supplies. I skipped meals sometimes so he could eat better. I wore the same boots for 10 years, the soles patched with duct tape, while he got new sneakers every school year. Daniel grew fast, and unlike me, his mind was sharper than any blade. He loved computers. At 10 years old, while other kids were still playing tag on the street, he was taking apart an old desktop a neighbor had thrown out and somehow made it run again. At 12, he built a website for the local grocery store and earned his first $100. I still remember him running into the kitchen, waving that bill in the air, shouting, "Dad, we don't have to worry anymore." I laughed, because of course, $100 didn't change our struggles, but in his eyes, it was a fortune. By high school, he was winning competitions, writing code that even his teachers couldn't fully understand. I never told him this, but I often sat outside his room at night, listening to the rapid clack of his keyboard. To me, that sound was like a lullaby. It meant my sacrifices weren't wasted. It meant the future was being built in that small Brooklyn apartment, line by line of code. Still, not everyone respected where we came from. Parents at school events whispered about me. They wore tailored suits and drove shiny cars, while I showed up in a dusty work jacket. Some teachers asked Daniel if his father ever attended college. Their words weren't cruel outright, but I saw the same look in their eyes that I would later see at his wedding, the look of pity mixed with disdain. They couldn't understand how a boy like Daniel could come from a man like me. And then came the Clarks, the bride's family, wealth wrapped in arrogance, dressed in silk and polished shoes. Raymond Clark, Sophia's father, was a world-renowned heart surgeon. He had degrees, titles, invitations to every high society gala in Manhattan. His wife, elegant and poised, carried herself like a queen, with pearls always around her neck. Their relatives all held positions in medicine, law, or finance. And then there was me, a man who built houses but never owned one. When I walked into that glittering ballroom on my son's wedding day, I already felt like an outsider. The chandeliers sparkled like frozen lightning. The marble floor reflected every step, and violins played music that didn't belong to men like me. Guests floated from one table to another, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter as crisp as crystal. I tried to blend in, standing a little taller, tugging at the sleeves of my only suit, the one I had bought second-hand 15 years earlier and carefully kept in the back of my closet for special occasions. Then came the blow, that nameplate, those words. Low, educated fake dad. It felt like every sacrifice, every night of sweat and blood, had been erased in a single stroke of ink. Raymond Clark's smirk told me it wasn't a mistake. His family's laughter was the orchestra to my humiliation, and for a moment I almost believed them. Almost. But Daniel's hand pulled me back. He looked at me with the same eyes he had when he was 10 years old, showing me that $100 bill. Determined, fierce, proud. "Dad, let's go home," he said. And in that instant, I realized this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. Because humiliation in public can either break a man or light a fire that no amount of wealth or arrogance can extinguish. The laughter still echoes in my memory. It wasn't loud, not the kind that shakes walls. It was sharp, clipped, the kind of laughter that cuts into your skin like a blade dipped in ice. When Raymond Clark's lips curled into that smug grin, when his wife covered her mouth as though she was stifling a giggle but her eyes betrayed the delight in my humiliation, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. I had walked into the ballroom as a father proud of the man his son had become. Within minutes, I was reduced to a punchline. I stared at the nameplate again, willing the letters to rearrange themselves, to spell something different. But they didn't. Low, educated fake dad. The words gleamed under the chandelier's light, mocking me with their permanence. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the rage that churned deep in my stomach. I wanted to rip that card in half. I wanted to shout at the 300 guests that I had raised, Daniel with my own blood, my own bones, my own sleepless nights. But instead, I flipped the card over in silence, pressing it face down against the white linen tablecloth, as though hiding it could erase the wound it left in me. Daniel saw it. His jaw clenched, his nostrils flared. For a second, I thought he might march across the room and strike his future father-in-law right there, but he didn't. He just put a hand on my shoulder, steady and strong, grounding me when my pride threatened to collapse. That hand said more than any speech could, "You are my father, and that is enough." I tried to swallow the bitterness, to tell myself this was Daniel's day, not mine. But silence has a weight. It crushes you slowly, making each breath heavier. Raymond Clark leaned back in his chair, sipping his wine, then whispered something to his wife. She laughed again, a sound like glass shattering in my ears. Their son, a tall young man with the same arrogant smirk, leaned across to his cousins and muttered, "Dropped out of school, builds houses for a living. No wonder." They all snickered, covering their mouths with manicured hands. The orchestra's violins faded into a softer peace, but to me it was as though they had stopped altogether. Every sound in the room funneled into the echo of those whispers, those laughs. My throat tightened. 20 years of sacrifice, of broken bones and empty stomachs, turned into entertainment for a family that measured worth by diplomas and bank accounts. And then came the bride, Sophia Clark, beautiful, yes. Her white gown shimmered like freshly fallen snow, her hair twisted into golden waves, her smile practiced to perfection. But when she leaned toward her bridesmaid and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "My real father is the man I'm marrying into money, not that poor worker," I felt something inside me crack, not a bone, not even pride, something deeper. As though the foundation I had built my life upon, the belief that love and sacrifice were enough, was being bulldozed in front of my eyes. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the overturned nameplate. Time didn't move in minutes anymore. It moved in heartbeats, each one pounding louder than the last, each one asking the same question: should I stand and fight? Or should I stay quiet, let them laugh, let the humiliation dissolve into the glittering air of that ballroom? Daniel answered for me without speaking. His hand was still on my shoulder, but his eyes, those eyes I had watched grow from innocent blue to the sharp steel of a man, were locked on Raymond. They were cold, controlled, dangerous. For the first time, I saw not just my boy, but a man who had learned the art of patience, the kind that doesn't let emotions spill recklessly, but waits for the right moment to strike. The orchestra shifted again, the music rising as waiters carried out trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvre. Guests mingled, laughing as though nothing in the world mattered but their next glass of wine. But at our table, the air was heavy, thick enough to choke on. Every chuckle from the Clark family was a spark tossed onto dry grass, daring me to ignite. And yet, I stayed silent, not because I lacked the courage, but because Daniel deserved better than a scene. He deserved better than his father throwing fists at his wedding. So I clenched my teeth, swallowed the fire, and told myself the storm would pass. But storms don't pass when arrogance feeds them. Raymond finally turned to me, his smirk painted across his face like a mask. "Tell me, Henry," he said, loud enough for those around us to hear. "Did you ever finish high school? Or did you trade books for bricks before you could spell your own name?" His wife chuckled again. Sophia glanced at him, then at Daniel, then looked away, her cheeks flushing not with shame, but with annoyance, as though the man who raised her future husband was nothing more than an inconvenience. 300 guests, 300 eyes. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others leaned in, hungry for the spectacle. In that moment, I realized humiliation wasn't just private pain, it was public theater, and I was the unwilling actor, trapped under the spotlight. Daniel's grip on my shoulder tightened, his jaw flexed, but his lips remained sealed, and I knew then. Silence would not end this. Something bigger, something deeper, was brewing beneath his calm surface, something that would change everything. The ballroom seemed to grow smaller after Raymond Clark's words, as if the marble walls had closed in to trap me under the glitter of chandeliers and the sharp scent of expensive perfume. The orchestra's strings wove through the air, delicate and elegant, but all I could hear was the echo of that smug voice and the laughter that followed. My throat tightened. My hands pressed against the tablecloth, gripping so hard that the linen wrinkled under my palms. Around me, conversations shifted. People who had been speaking about stocks, vacations in Europe, or the newest restaurants in Manhattan now whispered about me. Their voices weren't loud, but I caught pieces of them, fragments that cut sharper than any insult spoken directly. "He looks out of place. A construction worker, did I hear? Imagine his son marrying into this family. It doesn't fit." I could feel their eyes on me, glances sliding over my suit like knives, dissecting every crease, every frayed thread that revealed it wasn't tailored but second-hand. Raymond leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine with the air of a man who believed the entire room revolved around his smirk. "Tell me, Henry," he said, his tone dripping with mock sympathy, "did you ever get to finish school, or did the hammer and nails call you too early?" His wife laughed, covering her lips with manicured fingers, but her eyes glistened with the pleasure of cruelty. The laughter wasn't just theirs, it spread in ripples, guests smiling, some pretending not to hear while clearly enjoying the spectacle. I wanted to shout, to stand and remind every one of them that I had built foundations that held their luxury apartments, that I had carried beams that kept their hospitals and offices standing. Without men like me, their mansions and towers would be nothing but dust and blueprints. But my voice stayed locked in my chest, strangled by years of swallowing pride. Silence wasn't weakness, I had learned that long ago. Silence was survival. But silence didn't numb the sting of Sophia's words. She leaned toward her bridesmaid, her white gown glittering as though purity itself had chosen her, and whispered, "My real father is the man I'm marrying into money, not that poor worker." She said it with the casual cruelty of someone who had never missed a meal, never seen her parent collapse into bed after 18 hours of labor, never known what it meant to stretch a paycheck until it bled. Her voice carried just enough for me to hear, and I wondered if that was intentional. A test, a weapon. My chest hollowed, and for a brief moment I wasn't in that ballroom anymore. I was back in Daniel's elementary school gym, watching as he was shoved by older boys for wearing sneakers with duct tape on the soles. I had rushed in, ready to fight for him, but he had stood tall, his eyes burning even then. He hadn't cried. He had clenched his fists and said, "I don't need new shoes to beat you." That memory collided with the present. I looked at Daniel now, 25, tall, sharp in his black suit, every inch the man I had dreamed he would become. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared, his fingers tapped against the table in a rhythm I knew too well. It was the rhythm of thought, of calculation, of a storm held back by sheer will. He wasn't defeated by their insults. He was measuring them. Still, the clerks mistook his silence as surrender. Raymond raised his glass high, his voice booming loud enough to silence the orchestra. To education, refinement, and legacy. Some families build with books and brilliance, others with— He paused, glancing at me with a smirk that made his meaning clear. Bricks and sweat, glasses clinked, crystal ringing in hollow agreement, as though the toast had crowned him victor of an invisible duel. I looked around the room, 300 guests in gowns and tuxedos, pearls glittering, bow ties perfectly knotted. Some shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to meet my eyes, but most smiled, entertained. To them, this was theatre, a scene they would recount later over cocktails. The poor construction worker mocked at his own son's wedding. They weren't laughing with me, they were laughing at me. The weight of it pressed harder than any beam I had ever carried. For 2 decades I had shouldered labor that bent my back, bruised my hands, and carved lines into my face. But never had I felt a burden so heavy as the gaze of 300 wealthy strangers who saw me not as a father, not as a man, but as a joke. I glanced at Daniel again. His eyes were locked on Raymond. Cold, steady, patient. It was the same look he had when he stared at a screen, unraveling lines of code. He wasn't ignoring the insults. He was storing them, line by line, preparing for a response no one in that ballroom could predict. For the first time that night, my breathing steadied. I realized then that humiliation didn't destroy us, it forged us. Raymond thought he had broken me. Sophia believed her words had silenced me. The guests assumed their laughter had buried me. But humiliation, when endured, becomes fuel. And Daniel's silence wasn't the silence of defeat, it was the silence of fire waiting for air. I clenched my fists under the table, feeling the calluses rub against the rough napkin. My pride might have been bruised, but my resolve hardened. They thought this was the climax, the peak of my shame. They didn't know. It was only the beginning of a reckoning that would rewrite every story told in that ballroom. The orchestra tried to regain its rhythm, bows gliding over strings as if music could erase what had just been spoken. But the sound fell flat, lifeless, unable to mask the tension thickening in the air. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat a reminder of the humiliation carved into me, yet also a drumbeat of something deeper, anger, slowly hardening into resolve. Raymond leaned forward again, his polished cufflinks catching the chandelier's light. "Henry," he said smoothly, as though he were a teacher correcting a student, "you should be grateful. Not every man of your background has the chance to sit among doctors, lawyers, and men of legacy. Consider this evening a gift." He smiled broadly, lifting his glass once more as though granting me the honor of his disdain. His words churned in my stomach, bitter as spoiled wine. I thought of the nights I'd carried crates until my arms shook, of mornings when I stumbled home, just as Daniel was waking for school, my body screaming for rest while I cooked him breakfast with trembling hands. Those sacrifices weren't gifts, they were survival, they were love carved into sweat and blood. And now, in this room full of marble and gold, those sacrifices were being dismissed as nothing. I glanced at Sophia again. She was radiant in her gown, every fold of silk carefully arranged, every jewel sparkling as though it had been chosen, not for beauty, but for power. Yet her eyes told a different story, cold, calculating, restless. She wasn't ashamed of her father's cruelty. She was complicit. Her words earlier still echoed in me. My real father is the man I'm marrying into money. For a moment, I felt as though Daniel were invisible to her, reduced to a symbol, a stepping stone into further wealth. And me? I wasn't even a stone. I was dirt beneath her shoes. The waiters moved quietly between tables, setting down silver trays of appetizers, but even they couldn't soften the edges of the silence that followed Raymond's taunts. Some guests exchanged looks of discomfort, but not enough to intervene. Others leaned forward, eager for more drama, their champagne flutes tilting like eager microphones catching every word. And then, the unexpected happened. Daniel finally spoke. His voice was calm even, but I could hear the steel beneath it. "Dad," he said softly, turning just enough for his words to be ours alone. "Remember what you told me when I was 12, when the kids made fun of my shoes?" I swallowed hard, memories flashing of that day, his small fists clenched, his lip trembling with pride, me kneeling to tell him that fists win nothing, but who you become wins everything. Daniel's eyes burned with that same fire now. "I haven't forgotten," he whispered, "and tonight, neither will they." I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I recognized the certainty in his tone. It wasn't anger lashing out. It was something sharper, more dangerous, a plan already in motion. Raymond, oblivious, raised his glass yet again, his arrogance ballooning with each cheer. "To Sophia and Daniel, may their union be blessed with wisdom, wealth, and the kind of dignity that only true families pass down." He emphasized true families, his gaze cutting straight at me. Laughter erupted once more, rolling like thunder across the ballroom. My fists clenched tighter. I had endured countless insults in my life, foremen shouting, strangers sneering at my calloused hands, but nothing cut deeper than this moment, where 300 witnesses reduced me to a fraud in front of my own son. And yet, even as my pride bled, I felt Daniel's presence beside me, steady, unshaken. He wasn't broken. He wasn't humiliated. He was waiting. The chandeliers shimmered above us, casting fragments of light across the tables, and for the first time I saw the Clarks clearly, not as giants of society, not as untouchable royalty, but as people so blinded by arrogance, they mistook cruelty for strength. They believed this night had crowned them victors. But I knew, as surely as I knew the ache in my bones, that arrogance was always the prelude to downfall. Sophia leaned close to Daniel then, her voice sugar-coated, but laced with venom. "Don't be upset, darling. Father only speaks the truth. He's giving your dad a chance to feel included. He won't remember any of this tomorrow." She smiled sweetly, pressing her hand against Daniel's, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of irritation, an impatience that Daniel hadn't bent to her father's dominance. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't flinch, didn't return her smile. He simply looked at me again, and in that look, I understood something I hadn't grasped before. He wasn't just defending me. He was preparing for something larger, something that would turn this night upside down. I drew in a slow breath, steadying my racing heart. For 20 years, I had been the shield, protecting, providing, enduring. But now, watching Daniel's calm defiance, I realized the shield had become the sword. My son was no longer the boy clinging to my jeans, begging for answers. He was a man, sharpened by hardship, and he was ready to strike when the time was right. As laughter rippled once more, as glasses clinked and whispers floated, I sat in silence. Not because I was broken, but because storms don't announce themselves with thunder immediately. They build, quietly, gathering power until the sky itself cannot hold them back. And that night, under the chandeliers of New York's grandest ballroom, a storm was gathering. One that would not only silence Raymond Clark's laughter, but would also change the course of every person sitting in that glittering room. The city outside the hotel glittered, as if mocking the night we had just endured. Neon signs flickered, yellow cabs darted through traffic, and couples in designer coats strolled down the sidewalks of Manhattan without a care. But inside the cab where I sat with my son, silence reigned. A silence so heavy I could almost hear it breathe. I sat with my shoulders hunched, staring out the window, but the reflection staring back at me didn't look like a proud father anymore. It looked like a man gutted, reduced, small. My fists still ached from clenching during that dinner, and the insult, low-educated fake dad, kept circling in my mind like a vulture refusing to let go. Daniel sat upright beside me, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his tie loosened but not discarded. He looked calm, too calm. His gaze wasn't lost in shame or humiliation. It was forward, sharp, like he was already chasing a horizon I couldn't see. Finally, he broke the silence. "Dad, I need you to hear me out," he said, his voice low but steady. I turned, blinking, still raw from everything. "Hear you out about what?" He exhaled slowly, as though steadying himself. I knew something like this would happen tonight. My chest tightened. "What are you saying? You knew they'd humiliate me in front of everyone." His eyes softened, though they still burned with focus. "I saw the nameplate yesterday, Dad, the one with the insult. I thought maybe it was a mistake, some stupid joke meant for someone else. But I left it there, because I needed to see if they'd actually use it." His words cut me in a new way. I recoiled as if struck. "You let them mock me? After everything? After 20 years? "No," he interrupted firmly, leaning closer, his tone sharp enough to silence me. "I didn't let them mock you. I let them reveal themselves. Tonight wasn't about them humiliating you. It was about showing me who they really are, and they failed the test." I stared at him, struggling between anger and confusion. "What test, Daniel?" He leaned back, his jaw tightening, as though preparing to drop a weight. "The prenup. They've been pressuring me for weeks to sign it. Raymond wanted my assets locked away under his terms. His daughter wanted leverage. I refused. I never told them." My pulse spiked. "You never signed it?" His lips curved slightly, not in arrogance, but in certainty. "No, because they thought they were the prize, but they have no idea what I've built." I frowned, trying to catch up. "Built? Daniel, I know your company is doing well, but—" "Dad." His voice snapped like a whip, and for a moment I saw not my boy, but a man who had been forged in fire. He pulled out his phone, tapped, and turned the glowing screen toward me. Rows of numbers filled it, numbers I hadn't seen outside of headlines about the ultra-wealthy. 48 million, he said quietly, watching my reaction. "That's what Google paid when they acquired Iron Wall Digital. Finalized last month." I blinked, my mouth dry, my thoughts scattering. 48 million? He nodded. "Cash and stock options, and more. I negotiated equity deals, future stakes, partnerships. I didn't just sell an idea, Dad. I built an empire they don't even know exists. They thought Sophia was marrying into wealth. No, she was marrying into me." My body slumped against the seat as the cab jolted over a pothole. I wasn't sure if the shaking was from the road or from me. The pride surged hot and fast, but it tangled with disbelief. All those nights I'd peeked into his room, watching him code by the light of an old desk lamp, had led to this. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "All this time, you kept it from me?" Daniel's eyes softened. "Because it doesn't matter compared to you. The money, the recognition, none of it changes who made me who I am. Tonight, they laughed at you. They called you fake. But without you, there's no me, no company, no empire. You're the cornerstone, Dad. And tomorrow, I'll make sure the world knows it." The cab slowed at a red light. Outside, I saw a young boy holding his father's hand, tugging impatiently toward an ice cream cart. The father smiled, tired but gentle, giving in to the tug. And in that moment, I thought of Daniel at that same age, 3 years old, tugging at my jeans the night his mother left, asking why she didn't kiss him goodnight. I had sworn then I would never fail him. And now here he was, promising the same to me. I turned back, my voice trembling. "What are you planning, son?" Daniel's posture straightened, his expression hardening with resolve. "Clark Hospitality, the empire Raymond built. I've been buying shares quietly for months. As of this morning, I own 49%, and tomorrow I'll secure another 12. That makes me majority shareholder. The words crashed into me like a tidal wave. You're going to take his company? He didn't hesitate. Yes, not out of spite. Out of justice. He used his power to demean you. Tomorrow, I'll use mine to end his reign. And when I do, I'll make it clear. The man he mocked as a low-educated fake dad is the very reason his rival stands taller than him. I leaned back, overwhelmed. I wanted to warn him, to tell him power and revenge could consume a man. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw more than vengeance. I saw purpose, determination sharpened by years of struggle. By nights, he'd heard my stomach growl while I told him I wasn't hungry. This wasn't blind rage. This was justice carefully calculated. The cab pulled up to our Brooklyn apartment. The building loomed familiar, its bricks weathered, windows old but steady. I had carried Daniel up those stairs as a toddler, tucked him into bed after double shifts, cooked him soup when he was sick. This place wasn't luxury, but it was home. It was proof of our survival. We stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk, the cool air biting, the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting from a nearby vendor. I looked up at the old fire escape where Daniel once sat with a broken laptop, teaching himself code from YouTube tutorials. My chest swelled, not with humiliation anymore, but with something sturdier hope. Inside, the apartment looked the same as always. The couch sagged in the middle, the kitchen faucet leaked, and the walls bore the faint stains of time. But Daniel moved through it with the confidence of a man returning not to smallness, but to his roots. He tossed his tie onto the couch, rolled up his sleeves, and looked at me squarely. "Get some rest, Dad," he said. "Tomorrow we walk into their world, on our terms. And when we do, everything changes." I stood there, torn between pride and fear. I had spent 20 years teaching him to be strong, to endure, to fight without fists, and now I realized he had learned all of it and more. The protector I once was had become the man ready to take on giants. I nodded slowly, my voice quiet but certain. "I trust you, Daniel. Whatever happens tomorrow, I trust you." And for the first time since that cursed ballroom, the weight pressing on me eased. Humiliation no longer defined me. My son's determination did. And as I lay down that night in our worn apartment, the thought kept circling in my mind. Tomorrow, the Clarks would learn that legacy isn't written in titles or wealth. Legacy is written in sacrifice. The morning after the wedding, New York felt different. The same city noises, car horns, subway rumbles, vendors shouting on street corners were there. But to me, the air carried a charge, like the sky before a storm. I had woken before sunrise, unable to sleep, pacing our small Brooklyn apartment, while Daniel dressed with a calm precision that unnerved me. He stood in front of the mirror, tying a navy blue tie with practiced ease, slipping into a tailored suit that seemed worlds away from the hand-me-downs he wore as a kid. His hair, neatly combed, caught the light from the window, and for the first time I didn't see the boy I raised. I saw a man stepping into an arena I barely understood. "Dad," he said, adjusting his cufflinks, "today isn't about revenge, it's about dignity." I swallowed, my throat tight. "Son, you're playing with fire. Men like Raymond don't just lose, they fight dirty." Daniel's lips curved slightly, not in arrogance, but in certainty. "So do we. Only our fight is cleaner." He turned to me, his eyes steady. "I need you by my side, Dad. Not because I can't do this alone, but because I want them to see exactly who gave me the strength to stand here." Those words struck me harder than Raymond's insults ever had. I nodded, my chest heavy with pride, and slipped into the only suit I owned. It was worn, outdated, and the sleeves pinched a little at the shoulders, but for the first time I wore it without shame. By 8 o'clock, we stood in front of Clark Hospitality's glass skyscraper, a monument of arrogance that stretched into the sky like it wanted to scrape the Sunday. Its mirrored surface reflected the bustling streets. But I couldn't shake the thought that behind that glass lurked a family convinced of their own untouchable power. Daniel walked with confidence, his footsteps sharp against the marble lobby floor. I trailed just half a step behind, my heart pounding, my palms damp, yet I couldn't deny the surge of adrenaline racing through me. We weren't guests anymore. We weren't outsiders. Today, we were challengers. The receptionist, a young woman in a crisp blazer, looked up and blinked when she saw Daniel. "Mr. Parker, you don't have an appointment." Daniel smiled politely, but there was steel in his voice. "I don't need one. Tell Mr. Clark his future is waiting upstairs." The woman stammered, but Daniel was already striding toward the elevators. I followed, my pulse quickening with every floor we climbed. By the time the doors opened onto the executive boardroom, I could feel the storm pressing against my ribs, ready to break. Inside, the Clarks were already gathered. Raymond sat at the head of the table, his posture regal, his suit immaculate. His wife sat to his right, pearls gleaming against her throat. Sophia sat further down, her beauty as polished as ever, but her eyes avoided ours, flickering nervously between her father and Daniel. Around the long mahogany table, shareholders and executives whispered, shifting in their leather chairs as we entered. Raymond's smirk returned the moment he saw me. Well, well, the fake father returns. Couldn't resist another humiliation? His voice carried the same poison as last night, dripping into the corners of the room. I clenched my fists, but Daniel raised a hand slightly, silencing me before I could speak. He stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the table, the sound echoing like a gavel. "I'm not here for humiliation, Mr. Clark. I'm here for business." The room stilled. Raymond chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Business? You? Son, this is a boardroom, not a playground for your little tech games. We deal in real money here, not apps and computers." Daniel opened the folder with a calmness that made my pulse quicken. "Then you'll understand these." He slid documents across the table, contracts, share certificates, acquisition records. "As of this morning, I own 49% of Clark Hospitality. And as of 1 hour ago, I secured another 12. That makes me majority shareholder." The room erupted. Executives gasped, voices overlapped, papers shuffled like a storm of disbelief. Raymond's face drained of color before flushing red with rage. "Impossible," he spat. "You're bluffing." Daniel's gaze never wavered. "Check the filings. They're public record now. You'll find my name on them." Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. For the first time, she looked at Daniel not as a prize, but as a force beyond her comprehension. Raymond slammed his fist against the table, rattling glasses of water. "You think this little stunt gives you power? You think buying shares makes you a man? You're nothing without this family, and him," he jabbed a finger at me, venom dripping from his voice. "He's still a low-educated fraud who got lucky." Daniel didn't flinch. He stood taller, his voice steady but ringing with conviction. "No, he's the reason I'm here. The man you mocked as a fake dad worked 2 jobs to raise me. He sacrificed everything so I could build what you see before you. If anyone in this room understands legacy, it's him, not you." For a moment, silence fell. The kind of silence that fills a courtroom before a verdict is read. I sat frozen, my chest swelling with a pride so fierce it hurt. Raymond's lips curled into a snarl. "You'll regret this." Daniel leaned forward, his voice cutting like glass. "No, Mr. Clark. You'll regret underestimating us." The shareholders exchanged looks, their loyalties shifting like leaves in the wind. The storm had broken. And for the first time, it wasn't me under the spotlight of humiliation. It was Raymond Clark, stripped of the power he had wielded like a weapon. Raymond's face turned crimson, veins bulging at his temples. He shoved back his chair so violently it screeched against the polished floor, making several shareholders flinch. His voice, once smooth and commanding, now cracked with fury. "You think you can just walk in here with your cheap suit and your father's calloused hands and take away everything I built? This company carries my name, my blood, my legacy. You're a child playing games with numbers you don't understand." Daniel didn't rise to the bait. He sat still, his posture calm but unyielding, his fingers steepled in front of him like a man already in control. When he spoke, his words cut sharper than Raymond's shouts. "You're right, Mr. Clark. You built this company, but you also buried it in debt. You leveraged properties, mortgaged assets, and ignored innovation. You ruled by fear, not vision. And while you sat polishing your name, I bought piece after piece until today. Now I own 61%. That means this company is no longer yours, it's ours." Gasps erupted around the table. A few shareholders exchanged quick, almost relieved glances, as though waiting for someone brave enough to dethrone the tyrant. Others scrambled through the documents Daniel had laid before them, muttering to one another, verifying signatures and timestamps. The reality spread like a contagion. The Clarks had lost control. Sophia finally broke her silence. Her perfectly painted lips trembled, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "Daniel, please, this doesn't have to end this way. We can work it out. Daniel turned toward her slowly, and for the first time that morning I saw sadness flicker across his face. But it was fleeting. "Sophia," he said, his tone steady, "last night you called money your real father. You stood by while your family mocked mine, while they called him a fake. Tell me, if you didn't respect the man who made me who I am, how could you ever respect me?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her eyes glossed with tears, though I could tell they weren't from love, they were from fear. Fear of losing the life of power and luxury she thought she had secured. She looked down, her diamond necklace catching the light, but even that sparkle seemed dimmer now. Raymond slammed his fist onto the table so hard the glasses rattled. "Enough! Security!" he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. He pointed a trembling finger at me and Daniel. "Throw them out of my building." The guards at the door shifted but didn't move. Their eyes darted toward Daniel, waiting, and Daniel, with a calm that chilled me, gave the slightest nod. "You'll find, Mr. Clark, that they don't answer to you anymore. Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Clark and his family out of the building." The silence that followed was deafening. For a long, suspended moment, no one dared breathe. Then, slowly, the guards stepped forward, not toward us, but toward Raymond. "No!" Raymond bellowed, backing away from the table. "This is my company, my boardroom. You can't do this." He turned wildly toward the shareholders. "Stop him! Someone! Stop this madness!" But no one moved. The same people who had once laughed at me the night before now avoided Raymond's gaze. Some even leaned back in their chairs with faint smiles of satisfaction, as though finally witnessing justice. Raymond's wife clutched at his arm, her pearls trembling against her chest. "Raymond, please!" "Don't touch me," he snapped, yanking free. His eyes were wild, desperate, the look of a man watching his empire crumble brick by brick. Daniel rose slowly to his feet, his presence commanding without a single shout. "You taught your family to measure worth by wealth, power, and arrogance. But legacy is more than money. Legacy is sacrifice. Legacy is love. The man you mocked as a low-educated fake dad is the foundation of everything I've built. Without him, I am nothing. And today, I honor him by ending the reign of a man who never understood dignity." My throat burned. My eyes blurred. For 20 years I had carried the weight of humiliation quietly. Today, my son lifted it off my shoulders and set it ablaze in front of the very people who had laughed at me. The guards took Raymond by the arms, ignoring his thrashing. His voice broke into a hoarse scream. "You'll regret this, Parker. You'll regret the day you crossed me." But even as he shouted, his voice carried no power anymore. It was the empty roar of a fallen king. The guards ushered him, his wife, and Sophia toward the door. She looked back once, her eyes pleading silently with Daniel, but he didn't return her gaze. His silence was answer enough. As the heavy doors closed behind them, the boardroom exhaled collectively. The shareholders leaned in toward Daniel, some applauding softly, others already offering handshakes. He accepted none. Instead, he turned to me. "Come on, Dad," he said, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "Let's leave this place the way we came in together." My legs felt heavy as I rose, but it wasn't the heaviness of shame anymore. It was the heaviness of pride, too big for my chest to hold. Together, we walked out of that room, not as guests, not as outsiders, but as victors. Inside the elevator, the mirrored walls reflected us, my worn suit, his sharp one, two men side by side. For years I had feared my son would outgrow me, leave me behind. But in that reflection, I saw the truth. He hadn't outgrown me. He carried me with him, every step, every victory, every word he spoke in my defense. Daniel looked at me then, his expression softening. They thought they buried us, Dad, but they didn't know we were seeds. And as the elevator descended, I realized I no longer carried humiliation in my chest. I carried something stronger, vindication. The news spread faster than I could have imagined. By the following morning, every major paper in New York carried the same headline: The Wedding Takeover. Tech prodigy seizes control of Clark Hospitality. Reporters clustered outside our Brooklyn apartment, their microphones pointed like spears whenever Daniel and I stepped outside. Some shouted questions about betrayal, about power, about revenge. Others asked about me, the so-called fake dad, who had suddenly become the symbol of a storm no one saw coming. For the first time in my life, strangers didn't look at me with pity or disdain. They looked at me with curiosity, even admiration. But I stayed quiet. I wasn't the story my son was. My job had been done 20 years ago, when I chose not to walk away, when I chose to keep showing up, no matter how tired, no matter how broke. And now, the world was finally seeing what those choices had created. Daniel handled the spotlight with the same calm he had shown in the boardroom. He appeared on business panels, his face in glossy magazines, invitations pouring in from universities and think tanks. One article called him the man who toppled arrogance with innovation. Another called him a son who turned humiliation into history. But what struck me most was the interview he gave when asked about his upbringing. He didn't talk about coding or deals or strategy. He talked about me, about the nights I skipped meals so he could eat, the mornings I carried him on my shoulders when I had barely slept. He told them, "My father is not a fake. He is the most real man I know. Everything I am, I owe to him." I watched that clip 100 times, each viewing cutting through the scars of shame left from the wedding. Those words healed wounds I had carried silently for decades. But life wasn't just newspaper headlines and interviews. At home, things remained beautifully ordinary. Our apartment still smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. The faucet still leaked. The couch still sagged. On Sundays, Daniel still came into the kitchen while I cooked, leaning against the counter like he had as a boy, sneaking tastes before dinner was ready. The empire he now controlled didn't change the ritual we had built together. If anything, it deepened it. Because now, every meal, every laugh, every quiet evening felt like victory. Then one rainy night, the past knocked on our door. Literally, I opened it to find Sophia standing there, drenched from the storm, her mascara streaked, her hair plastered to her cheeks. She looked nothing like the radiant bride from the ballroom. She looked small, fragile, desperate. "Henry," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, I need to speak to Daniel." I froze, anger and pity warring inside me. For a moment, I remembered her cruel words, "My real father is money." Then I remembered the look on her face as security escorted her out of the boardroom. Now, here she was, stripped of arrogance, clinging to hope. Daniel appeared behind me, his expression unreadable. He looked at her for a long moment, silent, except for the rain drumming against the fire escape. Finally, he said, "What do you want, Sophia?" She stepped forward, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "I was wrong. About everything. I let my father's pride blind me. I let wealth control me. But I love you, Daniel. Please, give me another chance." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I believed her tears were real. Daniel's jaw tightened. His eyes flickered toward me briefly, then back to her. His silence stretched long enough to make my chest ache. I knew he had once loved her deeply. Part of me wanted to step in, to shield him from making a decision clouded by old feelings. But I stayed quiet. This was his choice. Finally, Daniel shook his head slowly. Sophia, love isn't proven when things are easy. It's proven when things are hard. When they mocked my father, you didn't defend me. You joined them. That's not love, that's convenience. And I won't mistake the two again. Her sobs broke the night. She reached for his hand, but he stepped back. His voice was firm, not cruel. Go home, Sophia. Build your life, but not with me. She staggered away into the rain, her figure swallowed by the shadows of the street. I closed the door, turning to Daniel, whose shoulders sagged with a weight heavier than any boardroom victory. He caught my eyes, and I saw both pain and relief in his expression. You did the right thing, I said softly. He nodded, his voice quiet. I chose you, Dad. I'll always choose you. And with those words, something inside me finally healed. The years of silence, the whispers behind my back, the humiliation at the wedding, all of it dissolved. Because in that small Brooklyn apartment, with the rain tapping the windows and the world calling his name, my son had chosen dignity over wealth, honor over pride. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's story spread even further. He wasn't just the young man who outmaneuvered a powerful family, he became a symbol. Schools invited him to speak about resilience. Business leaders asked for his insight. Parents stopped me on the street to say they told their children about him, about us. But for me, the greatest reward wasn't fame or recognition. It was Sunday dinners. It was hearing Daniel laugh in the kitchen or watching him fall asleep on the couch after a long week, just as he had when he was a boy. It was knowing that through humiliation, through sacrifice, through storms, we had built something no one could ever take away. And every time I caught my reflection in the mirror, I no longer saw the low-educated fake dad. I saw Henry Parker, a father who had raised a man worth more than all the chandeliers in New York. When I look back now, I realize the insult at the wedding wasn't the end of my story. It was the spark that lit a fire I didn't know was still inside me. That night, I thought humiliation had crushed me. I thought the laughter of 300 strangers had erased 20 years of sacrifice, but I was wrong. Because humiliation doesn't define a man, how he responds to it does. I spent decades believing my worth was measured in paychecks that barely covered rent, in calloused hands that no one noticed, in the quiet sacrifices that went unseen. But my son saw them. Every late-night shift, every skipped meal, every tired smile, I was planting seeds. And on the night they mocked me, those seeds bore fruit. Daniel stood tall. Not because he was born into privilege, but because he was raised on love and grit. The Clarks thought legacy was built on wealth and education. But legacy isn't written in diplomas or marble towers. It's written in the moments no one applauds. It's in the father who shows up when it would be easier to walk away. It's in the parent who sacrifices silently so their child can dream loudly. Legacy is not what the world gives you, it's what you give the world through the people you raise. To every parent listening, your love matters, your sacrifices matter. Even if no one thanks you, even if the world overlooks you, your children are watching. They are learning what strength looks like, what dignity sounds like, what love feels like. And one day, they will carry that forward in ways you can't yet imagine. I am not a fake dad. I am a father, and that is the most real title I will ever hold. So if you believe, like I do, that love and sacrifice can outshine wealth and arrogance, I ask you to stay with me. Let's continue sharing stories that honor resilience, that remind us all of the power of family, that heal the wounds left by cruelty. Because somewhere out there, another father feels invisible tonight. And maybe, just maybe, hearing this will remind him that he is not alone. If you found something of yourself in my story, I invite you to join me for the next one. Together, let's keep proving that dignity, sacrifice, and love will always outlast humiliation.